Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another event at the World Bank Pavilion. It's about what we call the CCDR Synthesis Report. CCDR stands for Country Climate and Development Report. This is a new series of reports that have been launched lately as a result of intensive work with now about 24 countries to prepare reports that is looking at climate change, but also put a very clear link to the development agenda. And these reports identifying options towards a low-carbon long-term growth path. What are the options? What are some of the trade-offs? This report, the synthesis report, captures some of the findings of these first 24 reports. And before we start the panel, I would like to invite the two key authors to provide a short summary of their findings. The two key authors are Auguste Kouamé. He's currently the country director for India. Before that, he was the country director in Turkey and one of the key movers behind the Turkey CCDRs, and his heart beats hard for climate change. And then we have Stéphane Hallegatte. He is at headquarters. He has a wonderful title about senior advisor, but you can actually say he is the champion in the bank on climate change. He has been tirelessly working and strengthening the analytical rigor of the bank in dealing with climate change issues. So the field and headquarters combined to write a synthesis report. So let me invite both gentlemen to make their presentations.
Thank you, Axel. I hope this mic works. Thank you, Axel. It is really a pleasure to be here to share with you the findings from the first set of CCDRs as synthesized in the synthesis report. As of now, and by tomorrow, teams across the bank will have published CCDRs covering 24 countries. These 24 countries represent 34% of the global population, and coincidentally, they represent also 34% of global emissions. The CCDRs have a way of analyzing how climate change can affect people, economies, and their development path. And one of the major lessons or findings coming out of the CCDRs is that climate change poses a clear and present danger for our development goals, especially the objective of eliminating poverty. And when the CCDRs looked at some scenarios to see how economies can be affected, and the low-income countries are particularly vulnerable. They can lose up to 12% of GDP due to climate change impact. But this impact is not only about GDP. You know, if you look at GDP, you tend to kind of forget about the impact on people. And CCDRs looked at also some of the impact on people, and the first finding in that category is that poverty can be really seriously undermined. In the Sahel, for example, the CCDR found that poverty can grow from 27% baseline to 34% by 2050 under a scenario of continued high global emissions. We also looked at the impact on inclusion. So most CCDRs found that the impact on women and children's prospect for lifelong or for work or for health can really undermine a lot of achievement that have been made already by the world in the social sector and inclusion. Having said that, the CCDR also said that the impact of climate change is not cast in stone. With good adaptation measures, countries can limit the impact of climate change on their economies. In the low-income countries, we found that the impact of climate change on CCDR, on the GDP can be reduced up to 5% percentage point of GDP. This is not insignificant. However, the world still needs more than adaptation. Adaptation has limitations. The world needs strong and fast reduction in emissions in order to protect development gains and in order to avoid hard-to-reverse tipping points. And as you can see on this slide, developed countries have a much higher CO2 emissions than developing countries. Developed countries as a group have an emission per capita, CO2 emission per capita, 4 times higher than the average for low and lower middle-income countries as a group. This means that, if you project this to the past, developed countries have a bigger responsibility in today's climate change because of the stock of emission that they've had in the past. We also know, and as the CCDRs show, that developed countries have much higher means to reduce their emission than developing countries. So one of the key points that we make in the synthesis report is that developed countries can do 2 things, and perhaps should do 2 things. One is to accelerate their own reduction in emissions, and very, very fast and very, very significantly. And the second thing they should do is to provide support to developing countries, first to adapt to climate change, and second to also reduce their own emissions. To close and pass the mic to Stéphane, it's important that we also remind ourselves, and as we say in the synthesis, that all countries have a responsibility to reduce emissions. Developing countries have to take up their responsibilities, and this is particularly true for middle-income countries that have a growing share of the flow of emissions going forward. With that, this is a nice place to hand over the mic to Stéphane, and I'll come back.
Thank you, Auguste. So the good news now, and I have to put that very low because I'm very short. Thank you. I hope you can hear me well. So the good news here is that CCDRs also explore low carbon development pathways, and they show that if the right conditions are met, we can reduce emissions without compromising on development. Let me get a little bit into the details. So our scenarios, in total, in CCDRs, reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 70% by 2050. Those reductions are not driven by a global top-down objective. Each of these scenarios are built at the country level from the bottom up, and they depend on the country context and also the climate commitments that those countries have made. Even though I have to say most of our low carbon development pathways are more ambitious than what is in current NDCs. So as you can see in this figure, for upper middle income countries, our low carbon development pathways have very large reductions in emissions, basically putting them on track for net zero emissions in the decades after 2050. If we look at lower middle income countries, they have emission reductions which are lower, but still significant in many cases. And low income countries, because of their very low levels of emission and high vulnerability, CCDRs have been very much focused on their resilience and don't have such scenarios in our CCDRs. So these 70% in reduction in 2050, what would be the impact on economic growth? Well, very little. Looking at GDP in 2030, we're talking about between a reduction by 0.1% and a gain by 3.3%. So this shows that emissions can be reduced without slowing down economic growth. And actually, in most of the countries, we find that climate policies would accelerate economic growth. And that's thanks to efficiency gains, to the use of greener but also more productive technologies, and also opportunities in green value chains. But as you can see in the lower half of this figure, the impact on consumption is higher and more negative. And this means two things. First, that poor people have to be protected from possible impacts on their consumptions, but also that external finance will play a key role to mitigate this trade-off between investment and consumption in countries. So Auguste talked about adaptation, I talked about emission reductions. If now we put these two things together in a development path, what are the key for success? Well, the first one are deep structural and policy reforms to align climate and development objectives. The second one is the mobilization of private capital, and more than that, a very active role for the private sector in that transition. The third part is the protection of the poorest to ensure a just transition. And the last one is an increased support from the international community, especially to manage the investment needs. And let me turn now to those investment needs. So you see here investment needs estimated in our report for upper middle income countries. So this is the additional investments that you need to do for adaptation and emission reductions compared with the baseline. In upper middle income countries, we're talking about 1–2% of GDP, something manageable, even though those countries face barriers in terms of reallocating public resources, providing the right incentives to the private sector, and of course managing very challenging political economy issues. But if we turn to lower income countries, you see investment needs increasing and becoming much more heterogeneous depending on the country context. And if you go to the lowest income countries in our sample of countries, then the needs can reach 8–10% of GDP. So those countries have a very low GDP per capita. They often have situation of fragility or conflict, and they are facing massive investment needs. But for all of those countries, what we can say is that to achieve this transition in a fair way, they will need much more support from the international community, and especially more contingent resources, concessional resources, including grants, and especially, of course, in low-income and lower middle-income countries. So let me turn now to Auguste for the conclusion.
Just 1 or 2 minutes to conclude. Thank you, Stéphane. Because all countries need to prioritize the most urgent and most important actions, we found that one of the best value added of CCDRs is really to provide a notion of prioritization of climate actions. And most CCDRs use 2 dimensions to prioritize the climate action. The first dimension is synergy between climate and development. So this means prioritizing climate actions that have high social and economic co-benefits. The second dimension is urgency. This means prioritizing climate actions that will allow countries and the world to avoid irreversible situations or to avoid hard to correct mistakes or very expensive mistakes to be corrected. Now, so what are those recommendations? Well, there's so many that we cannot summarize them here. So we're giving you here a word cloud to give you a sense of where these recommendations are coming from. So on the left, you have the mitigation recommendations, and on the right, you have the adaptation recommendation. It doesn't mean that adaptation is right and mitigation is not right, but it's just a way of presenting. Both are very important. In fact, what these recommendations show is that to implement clear climate action and successful climate action, we need to have whole-of-government approach, because these recommendations touch upon various aspects of policy makings in any country. So you need a whole-of-government approach. They also show that you need a whole-of-society approach, where all actors, government, civil society, the private sector, development partners, have to work together in a coordinated way to really address this biggest challenge that we face today. So with that, Axel, we would like to hear from you and the policymakers and how this can happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this very good summary. And I hope that nobody is getting confused by these 2 policy tables and so. Let me move now from the presentation to a panel discussion. I have with me Barbara Creecy. She's the Minister of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment in South Africa, as well as Stella Gama. She is the Director in the Natural Resources and Climate Change Ministry of the Republic of Malawi. And Auguste, one of the ministers of one of the other CCDR countries, excused us out in the last minute. So let me start with you, Barbara. And first of all, thank you for joining us. Maybe also to build a little bit on this CCDRs, what does that actually mean for South Africa? And so first from a substantive part, but also maybe going a bit further in terms of how did you see also the collaboration with the World Bank? Because multilateral institutions will have to support the international community in meeting some of these extremely complex challenges. But it would be also good to have a word or two on how you saw that cooperation, how it shaped over the last couple of months. So Barbara, over to you.
Hello. Thank you very much, and good evening to everybody. Let me start off by thanking the World Bank, I think not only for this significant piece of research, but also, as I will reflect in the few words that I'm going to give, I think the ongoing partnership that we have with you around the transition that is taking place at one of our coal-fired power stations. Let me say at the outset that I think the opportunities and the possibilities that are presented in this report are inspiring, but they are by no means inevitable. And I think that I would want to suggest that there are 4 things that we think we need to do in order that we can achieve some of the benefits that your report alludes to. So the first issue is that you would know we have recently developed what we call our Just Energy Transition Investment Plan. And this plan originated from the partnership that was offered to us at COP26 with some of the developed countries. And on Monday evening, President Ramaphosa was here and he handed over the investment plan to the international partner group. Now, what is important about the investment plan is that it is a South African-led and South African-driven vision for where we want to go to with our just energy transition between now and 2030. And we see the importance of this vision in the fact that, as was alluded to in the presentation, these transitions are not government transitions. They are whole of society transition, and they need to be guided by a common vision. So before we came here to COP27, President Ramaphosa actually handed the investment plan over to South Africa's Presidential Climate Commission with the intention that the Climate Commission will facilitate widespread public engagement with this plan so that as we move to implementation, that implementation should be a whole of society implementation. The second point that I would want to make is that these transitions have to be characterized by justice. One can't go to a worker in a coal-fired power station in South Africa somebody who by South African standards earns a good wage, who has benefits of pension, medical aid, and say for the broader social good, you must give up your job. It's not going to work. And so we have developed together with our Climate Commission a just transition framework that says that those directly affected in vulnerable industries have to be part of the process of conceptualizing the transition. They have to equally share in the benefits and not just in the risks. And thirdly, of course, that the transition has got to help us with some of our societal challenges of poverty, inequality, underdevelopment, and so on. One of the issues that we have confronted right up front is that while this transition offers the possibility of new job creation, it's a myth to think that those jobs will necessarily be created in the same geographic areas as jobs are going to be lost. And without active labor market interventions, in fact, you won't get new jobs at all. So the third point we would want to make, and this comes to our ongoing partnership with the World Bank around the Kouamé power station, is we said right in the beginning, let's not talk about a theory of a just transition. Let's actually do a proof of concept project where we take a coal-fired power station, we repurpose that power station with renewables, we overtly confront the fact that not everybody in the broader coal value chain around the Kouamé power station is going to have a job in the renewable energy plant, and we look at what other investments and economic development can we develop in the ecosystem so that the community as a whole benefits from the project. So that when we say to people we're going to repurpose, we're going to upskill, we're going to reskill, people can actually go and look at it and say, this is what you mean. And of course, we're very grateful to the fact that the World Bank is partnering with us around that project to the tune of a further $8 billion US. And the last point I would want to make is that while we are very excited about the existing offers of financial support we have both from the World Bank and the International Partnership Group, the realities of what this transition are going to cost are quite startling. We've been offered $8.5 billion US, which translates into roughly 131,000 South African rand. We need 1.5 trillion South African rand in order to get to 2030. And that's just to deal with the 7 to 10 coal-fired power stations that are due for repurposing, to begin the electric vehicle sector, and to begin the green hydrogen sector. So the question that I think all of us have got to confront is, where is that money going to come from? Because it's certainly not going to come in the form of grants and concessional loans. And therefore, we are very firmly of the opinion that for this transition to succeed for developing countries, we are going to need to see a fundamental reform of the international financial architecture, and particularly reform of the multilateral development banks. And I think 3 issues would be important here. The first issue is that the MDBs are going to have to become less risk-averse and are going to have to be prepared to take first loss. The second issue is that most of our countries are already heavily indebted, so there has got to be a fundamental restructuring of existing debt. And the last issue is that some of the reforms that are required and some of the transitional steps that need to be taken do not have revenue streams. And therefore, we need non-debt financing instruments. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Maybe we'll come back to that point as well. Let me turn to Stella Gama for her reflections.
Thank you very much. The diagnosis of the Malawi's vulnerability to climate change is overwhelming, clear, and refutable. The diagnosis demonstrates the stark reality of severe climate change impacts on the development trajectory of Malawi. And this demands urgent and decisive solutions. This demands immediate action and support. We are therefore very grateful that you have invited Malawi to this event on CCDR. And we are pleased that Malawi was chosen as one of the first countries in the region and also in the entire world to undertake the CCDR, which also mirrors the Malawi 2063 vision. We are delighted also to have been involved throughout the development of the report. And this report was just recently launched by the Minister of Natural Resources and Climate Change in Malawi last month. Without investment in development and without the additional adaptation measures, climate change could reduce the GDP from 3% to 9% by 2030. And the outlook for 2050 is that the GDP could be reduced by 8 to 16%. This has impact on the national economy and also the livelihoods of the people. Households vulnerable to the impacts of climate change are likely to increase over the coming years if there is no action. The CCDR has highlighted that about 2 million households, 2 million people will go into poverty over the next decade if no action is done. And this is depressing. We are supposed to be talking of numbers getting out of poverty, not going into poverty. So therefore, social safety nets will continue to play a larger role in maintaining the resilience of Malawians to climate disasters. Also demonstrated by the report is that development and climate adaptation are closely linked for Malawi. And we are taking steps to make sure that our national development is climate resilient. One of the measures that we are taking is to ensure that the infrastructure is climate resilient. For example, recently we had Tropical Storm Anna, and it is estimated that the Tropical Storm Anna caused damages equivalent to 2.7% of Malawi's GDP. One of the major infrastructures that was destroyed was the hydro power plant. And till to date, we are facing the consequences of the destruction of this power plant. We are also, therefore, updating our design standards and environmental and social impact assessment guidelines to promote climate-proof designs and also to maintain regular operations and ensure that we build for a sustainable, resilient Malawi. The other thing that we need to consider is to protect the communities. So we are scaling up productive safety nets program, and we are grateful to the bank, which is providing this support. Another priority area for us that will make the infrastructure resilient, ecosystems resilient, it is to massively restore forests and landscapes. This will enhance livelihoods, will also enhance ecosystem services, and also the enhancing the carbon sinks, which should slow down the carbon emissions. We believe that greater access to clean energy, water, and restoration of forest and landscape watersheds, boosting of commercial climate-smart agriculture should bring significant development and adaptation benefits. As we all recall, least developed countries like Malawi are lowest emitters. And yet, we are still making considerable strides to green our economy. We therefore have urgent need for financing support, to support the measures that have been identified for adaptation as well as development, alongside a low carbon growth path. Therefore, capacity, robust policies, finance is critical for Malawi to build infrastructure that can withstand climate shock and stressors, to halt and reverse forest and environmental degradation, as well as to address climate impacts for labor productivity, as well as household livelihoods. Therefore, the implementation of the CCDR recommendations is of paramount importance to Malawi to achieve the ambitious development agenda that we have highlighted in the Malawi 2063 vision. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Just before wrapping up, maybe a question to Auguste in his capacity as a country director. Clearly, both Barbara and Stella laid out a whole set of ideas of follow-ups and to make this actually concrete. How do you see that being followed up at your level as country director, engaging with the authorities?
Thank you, Axel. In the interest of time, I will focus on the financing side, which is the last point the minister mentioned. So what it means at the country level, and as we did in Turkey, the starting point is to realize that climate finance is not going to come from outside the current global economy. It's money that is already somewhere that will be repurposed for climate finance. If you bring it to the country level, it also means that there is a good part of the climate financing that will come from the existing pot of money going around in the economy. So first, through taxation or through carbon finance, the government can repurpose some of the financing in the economy toward climate finance, assuming that the revenues collected are properly used for climate action, whether either adaptation or mitigation. The second thing that we discussed also is to look at the current expenditures, the investment pipeline, to see whether there is anything that is in there that has low return or damaging effect on the climate, or both, that should not be spent, and that money can be repurposed for climate action. The third pot of money is to see if consumers, us, all of us, can tell the private sector that what we want is for them to spend their money on climate action. So it means we need to change our consumption patterns, our behaviors, so that the private sector get the signal that what the economy wants is goods and services that are consistent with the climate agenda. For this third thing to happen, the government has a role, and the role of the government here is policy and regulation and information on what is good for the climate, what has high carbon footprints, and regulations also to send the signals that behaviors that are not consistent with the climate agenda are going to be a bit more costly because of taxation, because of punitive taxation, for example. And incentives, also here, we have to, and that's where perhaps in the bank we need to have some debate. We need to be open to seeing some incentives and subsidies toward actions that are good for the climate, both on the adaptation side as well as the mitigation side. So this is the climate finance that we don't talk much about. Most of the time we will talk about climate finance as money coming from the IFIs. It's okay to talk about that because there is some money there. We talk about concessionality, we talk about blended finance, we talk about de-risking. All this is very important, but the three sources that I mentioned earlier, coming from the existing economy, repurposing and redirecting, is where the biggest buck will come. And we're encouraging government to see it that way, so that we see climate finance as the new financing of the economy, not just a cottage economy or a cottage source of money that will come from a corner. It is really everything that is being spent in the economy. Sorry, thank you for the opportunity.
And maybe another source could be by pushing harder on the removal of agriculture subsidies in OECD countries. That could help a lot of developing countries directly. And I think that we may actually also reinforce when we are talking about the financing plans that this is also more urgent than ever. Let me turn now to Merli Baroudi. She is the director in MIGA, and she has been the key person helping shape from the MIGA perspective the CCDRs, and I would like to invite her for some concluding reflections.
Thank you very, very much, Axel. And I think this discussion illustrates how important the CCDRs are for having an honest dialogue around climate. The first batch of CCDRs clearly indicate that there is the possibility we can do climate and we can do development. These both are achievable. But the CCDRs, I think, as we've heard today, this is really a step. It's a component, but it's a long process ahead of us to get where we need to be. I think the CCDRs, though, can catalyze a strong dialogue in government with a focus on what needs to be prioritized, what needs to be sequenced in terms of climate action. And I think this process can lead to a country-owned strategy. I think we've heard that today. We need a country-owned strategy that has an investment plan that can be implemented, something that is achievable and that all parts of the community can work together to achieve. I think at the World Bank Group, we are looking very strongly to use this CCDRs to work both the public and private sector partners that we have to strive to use the analysis to inform our work and our climate action. I think we can do this through the very strong country engagement process that we have at the World Bank Group, and to use the work to operationalize how we go about doing our everyday work at the World Bank Group. But these documents really go beyond the World Bank Group. A CCDR should be an opportunity for governments, for private sector, for citizens, and for communities to come together to engage on how they can achieve their development objectives and their climate objectives with a stronger knowledge base as a result of the CCDRs, and also with a better country-level coordination that would not be possible without the CCDRs. As I've walked around, actually, the various pavilions today, I've actually heard many panelists mention the CCDRs in their work. They're already, I think, beginning to feed into a strong dialogue around climate action and development. I think these are transformational documents that can really help us achieve a much stronger partnership across communities and across countries, and to move us towards a low carbon and resilient future. So I think as we look to the next COP, I think we'll have another set of CCDRs that we'll be able to learn from, and also be able to discuss how we've been able to achieve greater climate action from the first set of CCDRs. And it's a great accomplishment and something I think we're all very proud of at the World Bank Group. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Merli. This brings us to the end of this session. But what you clearly hear and see from this report is a couple of things. One, in analytical rigor matters when we are dealing with climate change. The process matters because we need to be inclusive. I think Barbara mentioned very clearly, you need to have the communities. Stella mentioned this. You cannot do this in isolation. So you will need to put a very good process in place to involve everybody, and so that they have a good understanding what the implications are, but that there is also I would say solidarity. It is basically an all-out society effort, and in which you basically will need to be very sensitive to whoever may be adversely affected by the policy makers. What also is policy action will matter. This is not an analytical piece without action. It has to follow with policy action, and it will have to follow with the necessary financing. And here, as Auguste said, the affected countries will do a heavy lift. But this will need to be complemented by additional support, financial support. And in here, we will need to be also in an advocacy role, that more needs to be done so that indeed the necessary financing comes on the table, and that is climate is not being seen only as financing, but we need also to make sure that the whole development agenda continues to be fully funded. This is our challenge. But let me really thank you, Barbara and Stella, for taking the time. Very much appreciated, and for Auguste and Stéphane for leading the synthesis paper, and thank you also, Merli, for joining us here in this session. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful evening.